Imagine growing up at the turn of the 20th century over in Lebanon, and you hear about this guy who was really devout and very well respected, not only by his community, but other religious communities. But you really only found out about him because he died recently. And then years go by, and you're not thinking about it too much. But then stories start coming through the grapevine about people who prayed for his intercession, and some incredibly miraculous things happen. But these stories just keep coming and coming and coming. How many are there? How many lives has this person touched from heaven? Howdy all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast, the show where we explore the stories of various saints throughout history and learn about what they did and how we came to recognize them as saints today. Today, we're going to explore the life of Saint Charbel Makhlouf, an extremely dedicated monk and a very prolific miracle worker. Youssef Anton Makhlouf was born on May 8, 1828 in Beka Kafra, which is the highest elevation village in Lebanon. He was one of 5 children who kind of grew up without a father figure. His father was a mule driver, but he passed away when he was returning from Corvier for the Turkish army. And that's like a indentured servitude for all citizens of the region. They can be called up for fulfilling duties at any time. So not quite slavery, but not like far off from it. They can't say no. It's like almost being drafted in a way. At least for the American listeners who know drafting. I don't know if other countries overseas have the same process or a different sort of process. But anywho, Yusuf's mother, Brigitte, raised the 5 kids for a little while before remarrying. But her new spouse went on to receive holy orders and became the parish priest of Beka Kafra. So you already know that he grew up in a very pious household. Yusuf became very intrigued by the lives of saints and eremitical life, living as a faithfully devoted hermit, basically. 2 of his uncles actually led an eremitical life, so he had first-hand experience on what it was like. As a young child, he had to help his family, and he was in charge of the small herd of cattle that they had. He actually took them to an icon of the Virgin Mary, and he would just spend his whole day praying there with the cattle. Eventually, he left his family when he was about 23, and he went to become a monk at the Lebanese Maronite order at the monastery of Our Lady in Mefuk in 1851. Then, not too much later, he transferred to the monastery of Saint Maron in Anaya, in the Byblos district, which is near Beirut. It was at the monastery of Saint Maron where Yusuf received his habit and adopted the name Charbel. He chose this name in honor of the 2nd century martyr of Antioch, and he made his final religious profession on November 1st, 1853. One of his first steps in preparation to be ordained was to study philosophy and theology at the monastery of Saints Cyprian and Justina in Pfeifen in the Basrun district, which again in Lebanon. As we've seen before with other saints, Charbel actually knew someone who became a saint themselves. One of his professors at the seminary was Nimutala Kassab, also known as Al-Hardini, but we're focusing on Charbel. Charbel was ordained on July 23, 1859 in Kirk, and then he was sent back to the monastery of St. Maron and led a very ascetic lifestyle there. Eventually, he was given approval from the abbot of the monastery to live as a hermit in the hermitage of Saints Peter and Paul. Charbel spent the next 2.5 decades there. Well, almost 2.5 decades, 23 years, so close enough. But then he passed away from a stroke on December 24th, 1898. During his life, his devotion was so well known and respected that even members of different faiths admired Charbel. Every day, he would celebrate Mass at noon, but that wasn't even close to the start of his day. At that point, he'd already been awake praying for 8 or 9 or even 10 hours. Could you imagine just praying for almost half a day just to get ready for a regular church Mass? That's some serious devotion. Now, if you're like me, you might be wondering, well, how the heck did he become a saint if he just lived alone as a monk and prayed a lot? What about any miracles? Things that are required to be being declared a saint? Part of the process, at least? Well, we'll get there, my dear friend. Just wait. When they began to move his body on Christmas Day, they thought that it was going to be a pointless effort. Snow was coming down so heavily outside that there was just no way they could accomplish their job. But as soon as they carried Charbel out, the dark clouds throwing down snow disappeared, and the weather was totally clear. George Emmanuel Abiy-Sassine was one of the pallbearers, and he witnessed this miraculous event. He could hardly believe it when he saw it. Then, A few months after Charbel passed away, others at the monastery witnessed a bright light surrounding his tomb. They opened it up and found Charbel's body perfectly preserved, and one day after seeing this, a blood-like liquid started coming from his body. Doctors and medical experts looked into this, but they couldn't explain what was happening. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. So he's now considered an Elaphori, a saint whose body produces an oil after death. But interestingly, I learned that there's a different term for those saints that maybe you've already heard, and they're called a myroblite. So if you've never heard an Elaphori, but you heard of a myroblite, they're the same thing, basically. Charbel's tomb was opened 2 more times, once in 1950 and once in 1952. And his body was still perfectly preserved, despite no effort being put in to do so. So he's very clearly an uncorruptible. And there's actually footage from the opening in 1950, and it shows his body in its immaculate condition, even though the tomb itself is deteriorating, and I'll put a link to that video below. Each time the tomb was opened, the blood-like liquid was still being produced. In 1965, the tomb was opened, and Father Joseph Mahfouz said Charbel's body was still untouched. So we're approaching a century after his death, and it's still, immaculate. But unfortunately, when it was opened again in 1976, only a skeleton remained. To be fair, that's 100 years after his death. To have been perfectly preserved for that long is enough, in my eyes, to prove what needed to be proven. The cause for Charbel's canonization began on April 4th, 1929, and on December 5th, 1965, he was declared a blessed, and Pope Paul VI held his beatification ceremony at the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council. Then, on October 9th, 1977, Charbel was canonized. His feast day is July 24th. Charbel is considered the patron saint of Lebanon, and many consider him to also be the patron saint of monks and for physical healings. And that's for very good reason, and you'll find out why momentarily. One of the most famous healings attributed to Saint Charbel was the healing of Nohad el-Shami. Nohad el-Shami was a 55-year-old woman who was partially paralyzed. On January 22, 1993, she had a dream of 2 Maronite monks standing beside her bed. One of them touched her neck and relieved her from her pain, while the other held a pillow behind her back. When she woke up, she had 2 small wounds on her neck, one on each side, but she was totally healed and no longer paralyzed. She recognized one of the monks as Charbel, but she didn't recognize the other one, and it's still kind of a mystery who it was. The next night, she had another dream of Charbel visiting her. He told her that he healed her to help bring people back to the faith. He asked that she visit his hermitage on the 22nd of every month and attend Mass. Now, people gather on the 22nd of every month at the hermitage of Saint Charbel in Anaya, and it is quite a spectacle. Another incredible and miraculous event happened in 1994, when Raymond Nader, a Lebanese Maronite, was praying at the hermitage in Anaya when he says that he had a mystical experience. He found himself in another place. He saw a strange light, unlike anything he had ever seen before. He described it as a sea of light that extended from one end of the universe to the other. He said that he wanted that light to stay permanently. It was that beautiful. After that vision and experience, he started leaving, but he felt a hot and itchy sensation on his arm, and it happened to be the arm that was closest to the statue of Saint Charbel. He rolled up his sleeve when he got back to his car, and he saw the imprint of 5 fingers. He described it as though they were engraved like a hand on my arm and encircled by a red glare as if imprinted through fire. But I felt nothing but warmth. It's almost as if the statue grabbed him somehow. He went to get it checked out by a doctor, and Dr. Nabil Hokayem, a plastic surgeon, said that it looked like those marks were 3rd-degree burns. They have somehow faded and returned sporadically ever since this experience. Raymond Nader has been visited by Saint Charbel many other times since, and Raymond has said that he has published 16 of Charbel's locutions. An elocution is like a revelation that someone has, but they receive it as though a different person is revealing it to them, like a whispering in their ear somehow, or hearing it in their head, or some sort of secret way. Is just kind of a, I need you to tell the world about this, but only that person can hear it. On September 2nd, 2017, some of Charbel's relics were moved to St. Elizabeth's Cathedral in Košice, Slovakia. A monthly pilgrimage goes on there, and pilgrims come in from various countries to take part in that pilgrimage. And then later in 2017, on October 28th, a small shrine was dedicated to Charbel Makhlouf in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. On December 1st, 2025, Pope Leo XIV even visited the tomb of Saint Charbel at the monastery of Saint Maron and gave the monastery and Lebanon a blessing. Since Saint Charbel's death, some accounts attribute over 33,000 miracles to him. Of course, the church hasn't confirmed or denied all of them. That just takes too much time to go through every little miracle. But rest assured, because even if 1 in 10 of those reports were true, if they were truly miracles, that's still over 3,000 miracles. With a 10% success rate, 3,000 miracles, you do the math. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So what do you think of Saint Charbel? What about his incredible healing of Nohad al-Shami, or the amount of miracles that he has performed? I hope you found his story interesting, and I look forward to learning your thoughts on Saint Charbel. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share with your friends, or send me a suggestion on a saint to check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. I upload once a week, every Thursday. Take care, and have a wonderful day.